Good afternoon and welcome to our afternoon hearing with the Pennsylvania Utilities Commission. Before we begin, I would like to say hello to my mother who is watching. I don't know why you're watching. My mother has been texting me for the last half an hour about the morning budget hearing. PCN must have put something on in the middle. She's been texting me questions about what she was watching on PCN in the middle, and I am sure I will get text messages about the PUC. So, hello, Mother. I love you. All right. We are here with the Pennsylvania Utilities Commission. We want to thank Chairman DeFrank and all of the commissioners for being here with us today. Chairman Struzzi, do you have any introductory comments?
Yes, thank you, Chairman Harris. I would simply welcome the commission. We look forward to your testimony today. Basically, the budget request from the governor's office is roughly about $103 million, or a $7 million increase, 7.3%, but we do understand that the vast majority of your funds come from other pots other than the actual general fund. So we look forward to your testimony today. Thank you.
Also, I just got a text message from my mother. When you get time today, call your grandfather. It's his birthday. So to my grandfather, who I think this is like his 91st birthday, happy birthday, Pop-Pop. I love you. Thank you. Now that my family situations are all cleared up for the day, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, we thank you so much for being here with us for this budget hearing. In the middle is our timekeeper. When that light turns green, our members will proceed with questions for you to answer. When it's yellow, that means that 30 seconds are left. And when it's red, we ask that you begin to conclude your comments so that we can get all of the members' questions in. Before we begin, Chairman, if you would like to introduce the other commissioners, and then we'll have you all stand so we can swear you in.
With me today, I'm PUC Chairman Steve DeFrank. With me today is Commissioner Katie Zerfas, Vice Chair Kimberly Barrow, and Commissioner John Coleman.
Thank you so much. If you all could stand so we can swear you in real quick. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you so much. You may be seated. All right, let's get started. Representative Mullins.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and to the commissioners, it's so good to see you again. We very much appreciate you coming here. Among the committee assignments in the House that I'm most proud of course, one being the Appropriations Committee, I also get to serve on the Consumer Protection Committee. The very title of that committee, something I take very seriously, and I was definitely in consumer protection mode last year when PA American Water suggested or requested a $202.4 million rate increase. And something you all were attentive to and accommodated a hearing so that constituents and community and state leaders alike were able to voice our serious concerns in northeastern Pennsylvania, specifically Lackawanna County and Scranton and the surrounding communities. It was mentioned just how untenable a $202.4 million increase was on the American Water customer base, and that it was suggested by one of the commissioners here that any significantly lower increase must be conditioned upon additional customer protections, not the least of which being increasing by $1 million to the the company's hardship fund to assist more customers, and also expand the group of customers that were able to be assisted, and that fund should not be paid out of or passed on to the customer base. This was customer protections in addition to us all out opposing such a massive increase were among our priorities that we advocated for and expressed. Can you just comment on the status of American Water's commitment as it was suggested in your findings, but also if there's anything the commission can do to compel a company to follow that order and ensure that it is not being passed along in some way to its customer base?
Sure. Thank you for the question, Representative. So, as you pointed out, this came out during Pennsylvania American's rate case last year. I commend you and colleagues in the legislature for your input in that proceeding. As you know, we held public input hearings throughout the service territory, and they were very robust hearings. We heard from many customers about that, and in fact, as a result of some of that testimony during public input hearings, we actually initiated a quality of service investigation out of it because customers were complaining about the quality of their service, particularly in your area of the state, northeastern Pennsylvania. When we adjudicated that case, one of the recommendations, suggestions we gave was asking PA American to put $1 million in their hardship fund. And that is for the poorest of poor ratepayers. I will say PA American has developed a customer assistance program, which is separate from that, but it was completely voluntary. We did ask them to do that. To date, and you may want to talk to PA American about that as well. I believe the company believes they met that commitment. In my opinion, I'm not sure they did.
Okay, and I appreciate that perspective. I'm just looking at publicly available documents here, and I know that in another rate request or increase, PPL, the electric provider, did in fact pay, and I guess this would count as, a receipt of $1 million into that company's hardship fund. I'm wondering if it's not something the commission has the statutory ability to compel companies to do just what PPL did, if it's something that we ought to consider legislatively to ensure that our public utilities are in fact meeting their commitment.
So the difference is we can compel them to do that, but both of those cases were settlements. So that's why it was voluntary. So both PPL, that was a settlement that was suggested that they do that. They did in fact follow up and do that. In the case of PA American, again, settlement, we suggested they do that. Again, in my opinion, I'm not sure they did. They did do additional money into their hardship fund. I'm not sure that it reached the $1 million point, though.
I appreciate it so much. Thanks for your service and being here. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. Representative Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairperson DeFrank, can you tell me, are you familiar with the Reliability Resources Initiative?
Yes, the RRI that was proposed in front of FERC for PJM?
Yes, as I understand it, it's designed to expedite the interconnection of shovel-ready generating resources. But can you explain this and how it's designed to help maintain grid reliability? Sure.
So one of the points, and I'm assuming we're going to be talking about resource adequacy a little today. We do have a restructured market in Pennsylvania, so that means we have a competitive generation market. And PJM is our grid operator, so they handle load forecasts for us, and it's an open market. One of the issues that was happening is that in the interconnection queue, there was a backlog there, and their projects weren't moving quickly. We've heard from some generators that were project ready, shovel ready, we're not getting into this queue because we can't get through the queue in a timely fashion. One of our advocacy positions here at the PUC is we're members of an organization called OPSI, Organization of PJM States. And what that is commissioners, or all commissioners in the PJM footprint are members of OPSI. Each state has a member on the board. So I'm the Pennsylvania board member on OPSI. That's one of the things we advocated for, at least I advocated for at OPSI for a while now, That is, the queue is actually an interconnection queue. When we have projects that, say we have an old coal plant that's shuttered and it's going to be converted to a natural gas plant, why is that project going to the end of the line as though it's a greenfield project? All the interconnections already established there. All the infrastructure is already there. That project should be treated a little differently. So the question is, do we put all of them in the same queue and allow them to jump other projects, or we do a separate queue? The RRI is the separate queue that PJM requested FERC, and it was just approved 2 weeks ago, I think. Just approved about 2 weeks ago to allow that second queue for those shovel-ready projects. It's an effort to get these projects online quick.
And I appreciate that, but let me ask you this. Would Pennsylvania's continued support and promotion of RGGI or PACER dissuade capital investment and job creation here in PA to participate in this initiative, thereby sending those plants into our neighboring states in West Virginia and Ohio?
So, Press and Pacer, I am not sure that's impacting that. I think you would have to ask the generators. There was a question that came up during our Resource Adequacy Tech Conference that we held in November, and we asked that same question because, you know, it's not even just about building in Pennsylvania, it's about building in the PJM footprint. And so if you're not coming to Pennsylvania, are you building in other states? We did hear testimony from one of the providers there that did say they were putting their building during that time was in Delaware and in Pennsylvania. Delaware is a RGGI state, and Pennsylvania was considering RGGI at the time. So that did happen there. In terms of decisions as to where to build, I think you probably have to ask the individual companies. But I will say, this is also new. It's only about 2 years.
Yeah, but let me ask you this. How can the governor claim to be reducing ratepayer costs by imposing a regressive ratepayer tax resulting in billions of additional costs? It's got to have an impact on these decision makers.
So again, Press, Pacer, RGGI, whatever, you know, we're calling it now, this version of it. RGGI is stopped. It's you know, under a stay in the courts as it's being considered.
Well, it's PACER now.
So Pacer now. So they don't have any real impact on the markets because they're not in place. There hasn't been any money changing hands. There hasn't been any credits being made.
Okay, and not to interrupt you, but we're almost out of time. What aside from failed PA policies can be to blame for high generation costs and reliability concerns? Just as PJM has alluded to in their letter, given concerns about guaranteed generation capacity, with the projected retirements of thermal generating fleet losses.
Sorry, so what's the question? I missed it.
So specifically, what aside from the failed PA policies can be to blame for the high generation costs?
So I think that in terms of generation costs, so when you talk about wholesale costs, you have capacity costs and you have the actual cost of the electricity. That cost has been down, mostly driven by the low cost of natural gas in the Commonwealth. So the actual energy cost has gone down. If you're referring to the capacity cost, which was increased in the last auction tenfold.
And it's going to go up again, as I understand.
Went from $28 to $270. That's been driven by a number of things. It's been driven by increased demand. It's been driven by decreased supply. It's been driven by PJM tweaks and changes in the rules of that capacity market and a lack of consistency. I think that if we get these down to a set of rules and we develop some consistency in that market, we will see that market start to perform how it should and send those proper signals.
I appreciate your answers. Thank you.
Tisk, 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 Representative. All right, Representative Fleming.
Good afternoon. Thank you, chairs. I want to start with an issue that just came to my attention recently that seems, when we talk about consumer protection, we often just think about ratepayers and individual home customers, but I recently learned about a concept called net metering, and then which usually is affecting small businesses, meaning that if I have this situation correct, basically they're being overcharged for the electricity generation that is being used, and they do not have an opportunity to sell it back to the utility as some other entities would. And I'm just wondering, sorry, just trying to get to my question here. I'm just trying to figure out what is the PUC doing in order to mitigate that circumstance, because, small businesses are being charged, millions of dollars, and is there any relief in sight? So
there is legislation introduced, and what I think you're referring to is sort of I don't want to call it a loophole, but how some folks, some developers have been taking advantage of current net metering rules. So what's happening is we're having entities come in and operating as basically de facto merchant generators.
Yes.
This started where someone would put a street light up into a field. That would be the draw, and they would put 5 megawatts of solar panels around it. That's really not what net metering was designed to do, and it's certainly not what the legislature had in mind whenever it adopted net metering. So what the proposal would be, I believe in the Senate, is to allow the PUC to set a cap on what can be net metered. The PUC did initially set a cap, and that cap was thrown out by the courts, I think in 20 or 21 in a Supreme Court case, citing we didn't have authority to oversee net metering because it was a DEP program.
Okay. So just quickly, Chairman, do we need a legislative fix in order to solve this issue?
I think that's the cleanest way, is a legislative fix to address the issue.
Okay, well, if there's any way to get there, I'll be happy to take part. Thank you. Secondly, I want to turn my focus to workforce development. I had experience, my first job with the Commonwealth was with the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency, and as part of those responsibilities, we had to exercise our nuclear power plants every 2 years to just make sure every level of government was working. So can you discuss the importance of expertise in this workforce, particularly trade unions and engineers and other people who keep our nuclear power plants running and keep us safe?
Thank you for the question. That's a very important question, and it's something that we struggle with every day. What we've done at the PUC in order to sort of build a farm system and try to home grow that talent is we developed an internship program. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Commissioner Zerfas, who handles a lot of our workforce development issues and heads up our intern program.
Thank you very much. So to your original question about that pipeline, pun intended, right, of that homegrown talent, right? Without a doubt, Pennsylvania has a beautiful relationship with our organized labor organizations and the trades. So having that homegrown skilled workforce is certainly important for projects that are, especially in our space, coming to fruition for the energy challenges or opportunities that are ahead. They represent the communities that we live in. You don't have to contract out from another state to have folks come in to do the work, right? Like they're here, they know the people, they know the place, they can do the work, they have robust training. And of course, as it relates to the PUC, my colleagues and I are all products, of internships, right? The chairman mentioned our internship program. I'd be remiss if I did not mention we formalized an internship program called Power Your Career. Again, pun intended, I love the puns. But the whole point is trying to make aware and get to, of our mission, what's happening in the energy and utility sector for students, so they understand what the opportunities are for careers, not jobs, right? Careers, whether that's a pathway to the trades or a pathway to college, we need bodies and jobs for these jobs of the future.
Absolutely, and I was really, really happy to see that there was a line item dedicated to that, and I really appreciate you all making that investment in our workforce. So thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to first start up following up with what I may have misunderstood, but when the gentlelady from Lawrence County had, previous questioner had mentioned about Reggie and Pacer, was I correct in hearing that you said there not been real market impacts of Reggie and Pacer because they haven't been in place yet?
Yes.
And is that so since the executive order, Pennsylvania has had 7 significant closures of either accelerated closures of power plants, let's say Homer City as an example, 2 gigawatts, or cancellation of new generation. And as the head of the PUC, you feel that those closures, premature closures, despite PJM's letter, Reggie had nothing to do with it.
What I'm saying is those closures happen because of economic reasons. That's one of the issues that, what's wrong with our capacity market. That's an example of it.
But when you say economic reasons, I mean, I guess I would respectfully disagree that the threat of Reggie had, specific additional taxes on energy generators in this state. In Pennsylvania would be specific taxes only in Pennsylvania, like the PACER or the PRESS program. So the Lackawanna Energy, based off of EPA, Reggie carbon tax of about 20.05. Lackawanna Energy, one of our newest plants, would be on the hook for $82 million in Reggie tax. You're feeling that would not impact the market decision of an energy generator?
What I'm saying, it was low capacity auction prices that spawned the closure of those. $28 megawatt days, that's difficult to operate any generator on. And so, those numbers weren't, they're low numbers. And so that's forced a lot of those closures. When we saw the number go up to 270, we didn't see new generation come in as a result of that, but we did see some closures stop. And
I just want to follow up on that that increase, because it was massive, like over an 800% increase.
900%, yes.
That, our energy generators and families, because there is a recognized shortage or potential shortage of energy within our grid. Would you agree with that?
I believe so, yes.
Yes, and so touching on the capacity auction settlement agreement between Shapiro and other, because he has the lawsuit to fund Reggie, but he also filed a lawsuit against PJM related to those increased prices. So the Reggie states will see an automatic increase of $125 in capacity. Non-Reggie states like Pennsylvania will see Reggie states will see a $125 reduction in capacity prices. Non-Reggie states like Pennsylvania will see a $45 increase. I might be misunderstanding that, but as an energy generation state, are we seeing an increase in capacity prices as a result of that settlement?
So the settlement, first off, has not been approved yet. It's been entered with the governor and PJM.
If it is approved.
FERC does have to approve that, though. So it's in the process of being approved. So the question is, if that is approved, what
would, based on my understanding, Pennsylvania would pay more, an automatic $45 increase, as compared to non-Reggie states that would be a $125 decrease.
I'm not sure that that's the first time I've heard that, and I'm happy to get back to you on that.
Sure. And I'd just like to move on to this. Earlier this year, the House Policy Committee had hearings for energy generators, and because of the recognized grid shortage, this issue of demand response came up, where the grid is contacting energy consumers saying they need to generate their own power. It's apparently a heightened engagement in demand response. How many more incidents of demand response have occurred in 2024? My understanding, it's significant increases, 345%.
So the way demand response works, so the individuals are not generating their own power, they're coming off of power. So what they're doing is they're not using power.
Correct, but
Typically,
by not
demand
using
response
power-
is a contract.
So if our hospital system in Westmoreland County, or employers, they're requested to go off the grid, they have to generate their own power in order to prevent brownouts already.
Right.
Is this accurate?
Depending on what their contract is, their demand response contract. So you can have an interruptible demand response contract or an uninterruptible demand response contract. I'm not sure the specifics of that case, what kind of contract they had, but whatever was drawn in their contract is what they would have to live with. So if they had an uninterruptible contract or interruptible contract, that means they would have to stop using power, yes, because that's what they contracted with, and that's what they received the payment for. So remember, there's a payment attached to that. They would have received the payment in order to power down when they're asked to power down.
Mr. Chair, 15 seconds?
12.
Well, it's great to hear you say that they would be paid for that, because we learned during the hearing that unless they have a specific tier, that they're not being paid for the power that they come off. And it'd be great to work with the PUC, specifically NRG and third-party energy providers. They don't qualify for reimbursement of the power they generate, and that just seems to be unfair. They're saving the grid, but then they don't get reimbursed for the power they generate.
Representative, I'd be happy to talk to you further about that. It is important because this is a time, you asked about a shortage. We don't have a shortage now. We're projected to have a shortage in the next 4 to 5 years, and we need to preserve every watt on the grid. So I'm happy to talk to you further.
I appreciate the discretion, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Sure. Thank the gentleman, Representative Young.
Good afternoon. Happy Women's History Month. I want to start by saying, Mr. Chairman, I am liking the optics of this space right now as it relates to the leadership structure that you have in place, so I appreciate that. Pivoting to the question as it relates to the rate increases, can you just share with us, when the demand for energy increases and the supply fails to keep up, can you just share with us the effects that might have on the residents and businesses in the Commonwealth?
Sure. So we have a restructured market in Pennsylvania, so that means that your power company, your electric company, PECO, PPL, that they deliver power to you. So that's your distribution company. And then you can choose a retail supplier of your choice, or you can ask your electric company to purchase power for you, and that's default supply. When we talk about increases in supply, those are the issues we're talking about with, Representative Nelson, for instance. He was talking about cost of the commodity, not cost of delivery of the commodity. When we talk about rate cases, though, we're talking about cost of delivery of the commodity. So do you want to talk about supply and what those cost increases were?
Sure, that would be great. Thank you.
So as we said, there was a 900% increase in the capacity auction last July. So the previous price went from $28 a megawatt day up to $270 a megawatt day. Keep in mind that piece only accounts for about 30% of the overall cost of power. The other 70% is made up of the actual cost of power. So we've seen default supply auctions coming in. We're still going through those numbers, but it seems as though the prices have been relatively consistent with what we've seen before, and that's because the cost of electricity, the cost of the commodity, is down. So we have low-cost natural gas, which has caused those costs to come down, and they sort of covered the increased capacity costs. Because remember, while it was a 900% increase, that 900% increase only accounts for a small portion of the commodity cost.
Thank you so much.
Thank the gentlelady. Representative Barton.
Thank you, Chairman. And welcome, Chairman DeFrank, and your panel as well. So Pennsylvania is the #2 energy natural resource in the United States of America. We are, if the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania was a country, we'd be the 11th energy-rich country in the world. And with that said, the current administration in Washington, D.C. is emphasizing the growth of jobs and industry across the country with a particular focus on prioritizing all energy sources, but especially those that can make an immediate economic impact, reduce costs for consumers, and ensure energy generation and reliability for the electric grid. And that raises concerns of something we've been talking about, the governor's proposal to implement a regressive carbon emissions tax on electricity generation through either joining the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative or the governor's proposed PACER, Pennsylvania Climate Emissions Reduction Act. So can you, Chairman DeFrank, just give me your perspective as an agency that oversees these issues on how this will impact some of the issues that's raised by PJM as outlined in their letter?
And I'm sorry, what will address that? PACER and press?
Yeah.
So,
and specifically the governor's choice to stay there.
right. So this is a policy decision that I think needs to be discussed by the General Assembly and the governor. As I said, we are an economic regulator. So when we talk about, those issues having impact and costs and things like that, the reason I said they haven't is because there hasn't been any dollars changing hands. There hasn't been any credits purchased in Pennsylvania. So it hasn't been impacting Pennsylvania ratepayers on a dollar and cents. Now, so it's a direct impact. If you want to say, well, generators aren't coming here or decisions are being made or not made because of that, I think that's a different conversation. But in terms of what has happened, rubber meeting road, again, there hasn't been any credits, there hasn't been any money changing hands. So that's why I say it hasn't impacted rates. What's impacting rates is, again,
with all due respect, sir, my time's limited.
Yeah.
And I understand where you're coming from, but the fact of the matter is we've had 5 speakers so far. This is the 3rd question on PACER and press and Reggie. And gosh, I appreciate the fact that you didn't even know what we were calling it right now when you were speaking to the good lady from Lawrence County, because it changes and we just change acronyms, but it's the same thing. And my question is just, this has to be a topic within your agency, and I realize that you oversee that. So oversee these issues, pardon me. And so just was curious of specific thoughts.
Again, and I mean, I think this is a policy decision that's made by policymakers. We're not making this decision. I think that, when you look at what the governor proposed, what has been discussed in the General Assembly, I think at the end of the day, you hit the nail on the head. We are a leading energy producing state in the country. And, I think at the end of the day, we do need a comprehensive energy policy. What has happened in the last 10 years is we've been piecemealing this. We really haven't had a comprehensive approach. I think that that's what's needed in order to leverage our energy power here. We're #2, as you pointed, #2 producing state for natural gas in the country. That's a huge issue. We are the largest exporting state in PJM footprint. That's a great position to be in. We have great power because of our energy.
It is, and
resources.
I think that our administration in Washington, D.C. wants us to embrace that, and I think there's a lot of folks in this body that does as well. And when we talk about PACER or Reggie, both acronyms refer to programs containing regressive carbon taxes on electricity generation. And at current Reggie carbon tax rates, 2023 emissions data, PA ratepayers, especially Pennsylvania residential ratepayers who pay 40% more than average ratepayer of classes, will be on the hook for $1.5 to $1.8 billion per year. $1.5 to $1.8 billion per year. Either way, it amounts to additional costs for consumers. And so I'm asking you in your opinion, sir, as the agency dealing with utilities, how does a potential $2 billion regressive carbon tax from Reggie or Pacer on electricity generation paid by ratepayers lead to lower electrical bills?
So I don't think it does if the numbers are correct. I will say that we were asked to run numbers of what Pacer would cost by the Senate Republicans asked us. We do not have the expertise in the House to do that. We were working with IFO, and I know the IFO did reach back out to the Senate Republicans, but to the best of my knowledge, I don't believe there have been models run. So, I'm not sure where the numbers came from, but, if we're adding costs by $2 billion, then that has to come from somewhere.
Thank you very much.
If that's accurate.
Thank the gentleman.
Chairman, thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Salisbury.
Good afternoon. I have a question related to the moving industry in Pennsylvania. So back when I was starting my own business around just over a decade ago in Allegheny County, I was fortunate enough to become member of a small business mentoring program that was actually begun and operated by a woman who had run a moving company. And what I started to learn then and in subsequent years is that a lot of people want to start a small business that moves household goods. It's a relatively low capital, low barrier to entry, in theory, business that entrepreneurs are able to get started. When the change in the regulation of the moving industry happened, where you no longer had to prove market need, and it shifted over to a 2-year work requirement, either in a household goods, licensed household goods mover or the equivalent, what I started to see is that people weren't able to make that 2-year requirement, and so it's holding them back from starting a licensed business, which then forces them to either lie to a potential employer to get a job in their business, hopefully without knowing that they're creating a potential competitor, or operate without a license. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how maybe we can lower those barriers to entry for entrepreneurs.
So that is a very, thank you for the question. It's something that I've been struggling with since I've been a commissioner since 22. As you said, this is an opportunity for folks, and we want to give that opportunity. We run into issues with insurance payments on these types of entities, as well as that work requirement, that work experience. We've tried to be realizing that we're trying to put folks to work, try to be as lenient as possible. We've tried to consider certain types of work as meeting that requirement. In terms of eliminating that requirement or changing it, we really haven't had those discussions, but I'm happy to have further discussions with you about that. We want to be able to bring as many folks into this industry and allow them to be in this industry as possible, while still protecting some of our customers, our residents.
Yeah, I mean, we, of course, hear these horror stories about unlicensed operators who sort of kidnap people's furniture and so forth. So we want people to be licensed and be registered.
I always think of the movie, the Richard Pryor movie, Moving. But I think my colleague, Commissioner Coleman, wanted to add to that.
Thank you, Chairman. Actually, this is an item that I testified before I came to the commission from a chamber that I ran. I had a member that was in the moving company looking to expand their jurisdiction. And fast forwarding to the time I got at the commission, I led a change in that particular piece of the regulation, that the moving companies that were already in existence did not want any new moving companies in their territory. So this was an impediment to anybody who wished to establish a new moving company. And they would show up en masse, and they would object to that particular petition. So the regulation that's in place today is actually, in my opinion, is better than what we were. But I appreciate your comment that perhaps we need to take a look at that as well.
Yeah, it's something that I see, the district that I represent in Allegheny County, there's a lot of interest in entrepreneurship. And so people are looking for ways that they can get involved in operating businesses that don't have a huge capital investment. So in theory, somebody who has, maybe a couple of cousins in a truck would be able to participate in being a licensed mover. They can get insurance and that sort of thing. But with this 2-year impediment, it just seems like it creates a catch-22 for people, because if you, for instance, I even run into people who don't know that there's any such thing as moving licensing in Pennsylvania, so they try to start a business, they start advertising it even on social media, and then somebody will point out to them, sometimes embarrassingly in public, that you have to be licensed to do this business. So then it's hard for them to step back, go and get a job at somebody else's moving company, and obviously that person knows you're just gonna, count the days until your 2 years is up so that you can go and be my competitor now.
Representative, if I may add, you may also want to reach out to the small business advocate. That she, routinely is very active in matters before the commission, and that's something that's, we're talking about small businesses. That's something that's, she may be.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your feedback.
Thank the gentlelady, Representative Krupa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the testifiers here today. I do have to give a shout out to Chairman DeFrank. My district is Southern Fayette County. Okay. Grew up 10 miles south of Uniontown, so I love a Fayette County kid does well story. So thank you for being here today. Nice to meet you. Very nice to meet you. So I'm sure that you can relate to the fact that Uniontown and Fayette County is a very depressed area. I was very saddened. I'm at the beginning of my second term. Last term, there were 2 manufacturers that were trying to expand their businesses, and unfortunately, one of the major roadblocks that they're facing is grid issues. A third manufacturing company, and it's not that the power doesn't exist, it's that the grid won't support getting the needed power to them. Recently, the governor announced that a substantial amount of money was going to go to Haranic Corp., a growing manufacturing welding unit, and everybody was very excited about that. The governor's action team dedicated this money, and then the same story. The grid won't bring them the energy that they need, and now you're looking at a 1.5-year delay. In my opinion, Pennsylvania, with the energy that we have, that's totally unacceptable, particularly in a place like Fayette County, where we are depressed and we need every economic advantage and opportunity that we can get. So your budget document highlights utilization of $4.5 million in grants from the U.S. Department of Energy to enhance the process of reviewing proposed high voltage transmission line projects in Pennsylvania. Can you explain what was done as part of this project and how you coordinate or would coordinate with PJM interconnection when addressing grid reliability?
So I will ask Vice Chair Barrow to answer that question. She's been heading up some of our transmission issues.
Thank you.
So right now, transmission is what we spend a lot of time talking about. Cost for transmission up about 14% across PJM. And it's because there's a lot of building going on, probably not enough building going on, but also, as you heard the chairman say before, interconnection queues are backed up. The work is backed up. So the commission, ever since 1996, when we got out of overseeing generation and to a smaller part, transmission as well, we applied for the grant because we need the personnel, we need the expertise brought back in-house to take a really close look at what is a smart way, where in the state needs development,
How many of these high voltage, excuse me for interrupting, time's limited. Yeah. How many of these high voltage transmission line projects are currently being proposed in Pennsylvania? And is the Mid-Atlantic Resiliency Link from Frederick County, Virginia to Greene County, Pennsylvania, which is going to purportedly cross right through my farm, is that one of these projects? And what does that process look like?
That is one of the projects, and that has to go in front of FERC. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. That one is not in front of us.
Okay. So then which projects are you doing this review process?
So we get hundreds of smaller transmission applications every year. They're a simplified process. I'm not familiar with the project in Fayette, and we'll take a look at that and get back to you on that.
How does one of the high voltage transmission projects play into grid reliability on a local level?
So that's the backbone. That's those like 500 or 700 kV lines. That'll be the backbone across the region, not just across Pennsylvania. So we have to have a reliable high voltage backbone in order to then connect the smaller lines off of that to deliver power to your locality.
Okay. There's a lot of discussion about the data centers or data processing centers, and that's an exciting discussion. You know, in my area, there's been some vague, casual rumors about some potential, but when that is an additional drain on reliability, correct? What are we doing in Pennsylvania to address that issue so that we can be more inviting to these companies?
So just last year, we headed up a technical conference on resource adequacy because we started to see the impact these data centers are having on load growth. We took comments from generators, electric distribution companies, various stakeholders. We're digging through those comments right now, and we will have some recommendations in the near term. But we are going to need 30 to 40 gigawatts of power in this region in the next 5 years. And I am hopeful that a lot of these data centers bring their own power.
My time is up. I thank you all for your testimony. Chairman DeFrank, I'll tell everybody back home you said hello.
Please do.
Thank the gentlelady. We're going to go to Chairwoman Fiedler.
Thank you so much, Chairman. Thank you all for being here today. We appreciate it. Chairman, a few questions for you. So we haven't talked, we've talked only a little bit about PJM, and I was hoping that you could dig into it for us a little bit. Since Pennsylvania restructured its electric market back in the 90s, we of course no longer allow our electric utilities to build and own generation, and we've turned that function really over to the market. And PJM, as I understand it, runs that market. Can you explain a little more about what PJM is and what it does, especially for our constituents back home who are interested certainly in energy prices and their utility bills, but may not be familiar with that acronym?
So PJM stands for Pennsylvania, Jersey, Maryland. It is the local grid operator. So it covers the 13-state area in the Mid-Atlantic as well as the District of Columbia.
Thank you. And can you explain what the function of PJM is, the impact that it has on all Pennsylvanians?
Yeah. So as you pointed out, we are a restructured state. So previously, when all states were vertically integrated, vertically regulated, that means that the local distribution company also generated power for you. When we restructured, we separated generation from local distribution. So now what we regulate here at the PUC is the local distribution aspect of it. For instance, you can't decide which electric company services your home, but you can decide where the power comes from. So you do have the ability to, as a retail shopper, to shop, and you can get power that may be wind generated. You can get the cheapest power, whatever you want. It gives you that opportunity. Whenever we did that, we basically said to PJM, okay, you handle our resource planning now. And for 20 plus years, we had stagnant load growth with huge reserve margins in PJM. I remember when I was a staffer back in the Senate, we used to attack PJM for the huge reserve margins now. And now we're appreciating those reserve margins. So what we did was say to PJM is, you're responsible for resource planning here. And as a result, they developed the capacity market, which was a 3-year forward-looking market, which was designed to, either incent generation or to send market signals to generators, whether they should open new generation or shutter generation.
Thank you for that. And let me ask you just a little more about that capacity auction. The price at the PJM capacity auction has jumped from $34 in 2023-24 to $270 in 25-26. That's a stunning more than 900% increase. Pretty big. Could you briefly describe the purpose of the auction? I think you touched on it, but if you'd like to say more, and really what that auction price tells us as lawmakers about the need for energy generation right here.
So again, that auction is designed to either incent generation or send a trigger to close generation. So I would say at a $270 clearing price, the market's saying build generation. And that's from the load forecast that Vice Chair Barrow has spoken about to the previous speaker. We are expecting a 30 to 40 gigawatt shortfall by 2030. So what that means then is, we either have to generate it, we either have to build transmission out, or we either have to reduce usage in order to meet our, so supply meets demand needs.
That makes sense to me. It's saying we need more energy. Maybe even a stronger word, right? It's screaming it, it's yelling for our attention. You mentioned earlier that we've been doing a lot of this piecemeal and the need for a comprehensive energy policy for Pennsylvania. A recent report stated that the PJM grid operators, quote, very slow pace of interconnecting new generating capacity in recent years will cost consumers as much as $7 billion in the coming year. As I said, most people back home are not familiar with the acronym, but they do care about their utility bills. Do you feel that PJM's failure to plan for and implement connection reforms years ago is leading to the problems that we have now?
It's hard to say because, this load forecast, the load growth is being largely driven by data centers. So, in order to say, well, PJM's accountable, we would have to say that PJM should have known data centers were coming. Maybe some thinks maybe some folks think they should, maybe some, think, well, that was kind of tough. 18 months ago, we weren't talking about data centers like we are today. They're such large users of power that, 1-2 data centers can really throw off the load forecast for an EDC. So I think, these data centers are coming. We want them. We have to get our arms around them. We have to figure out what's really coming and what's, hopefully coming. Because this build out, like I say all the time, is we're not talking about putting a turning lane or curb cuts here for this development. This is real money. And if we don't get it right, ratepayers are going to be saddled with it.
Thank you for your answers. Thank you, Chairman, for your time.
Thank the gentlelady. Representative Flood.
Thank you, Chairman. Welcome, Chairman DeFrank. As discussed with previous colleagues, I know that you're aware of this December 9th, 2024 letter from Mark Takahashi, who PJM's chair for the Board of Managers, to all shareholders on the filings related to the enhancements to the interconnection process and adjustments to the capacity market. As you may know, but to the benefit of the members and people who are watching at home, the letter expressed the concern that the PJM board members, concerns that they've had for some time now related to the enhancements to the interconnection process and adjustments to the capacity market and rapidly tightening supply-demand balance on the system by citing the following. Electrification coupled with the proliferation of high-demand data centers resulting in material forecasted load growth for the foreseeable future, the volume of resources in the interconnection queue being processed pursuant to the FERC's order on PJM's interconnection process reform and doesn't have the same capacity value and operational characteristics as the retiring thermal generating fleet. Solar and wind just doesn't have the same megawatt generation, and that's concerning. Retirement of thermal generators at a rapid pace due to policy and economic pressures, and slow new entry of replacement generation resources due to the combination of industry forces, including siting, permitting, and supply chain constraints. PJM are calling out these problems. So In short, it stressed that by taking the anticipated 2025 load forecast into account, that the PJM system could see a capacity shortage as soon as 2026-27 delivery year. So we could potentially see brownouts. More and larger megawatt generation capacity needs to be online more expeditiously through interconnection queue. What are your thoughts specifically on the issues raised in the PJM letter, and how concerned are you about the rapidly retiring thermal generation that provide immediate and reliable power throughout our Commonwealth?
So we'll take the last part of that question. I'm very concerned because, a 30 to 40 gigawatt shortfall. So to be clear, I believe we do have enough power generation. It's when these data centers start coming online is when we're going to see that pressure. When you cited the 26 capacity, it could be as early as 26. Remember, that's 3 years forward looking, so it's actually saying 29. It would be in the 26 auction that you would start to see that, but the actual impact would be 3 years after that. So I do have concern about that because it's such a large cliff that we're looking at. And we are going to need to put as many watts as we possibly can on the grid to meet that need. I don't think we're going to be able to generate our way out of it. I think we also have to talk about load shifting and load management and how, particularly with data centers. Again, they're such large users, how we manage that load. Say I have, 6 data centers in the Commonwealth or even PJM footprint. Maybe I can shift load and power 5 at one time and, shutter 1 and then shift that around. I think we got to start being creative, and we can't do things how we always have when we've had that huge reserve margin.
Okay. Thank you for your answer. I yield back.
Trying to make up for this morning. I got you. Yeah, all right. Thank the gentlelady. Representative Webster.
Thank you, Chairman, and Chairman DeFrank, thank you for, it just follows on, so I'll continue the data center questions. The last 2 representatives also asked. I want to sort of take it to our roles and missions, whether I say we as the legislature or the Public Utility Commission, what responsibility do we have? These data centers are coming online, but we have existing customers and constituents who are going to be impacted. What's our responsibility to protect the public as this is going on?
So that's a very good question, and that's the magic question, isn't it? If we have a situation like Winter Storm Elliott, for instance, a couple years ago, where we're very close to, demand outpacing supply, are we going to power down the data center, or are we going to power down 30,000 homes? That's the question.
That's the question.
So I think first off, and that's why I get into load shifting, load management, because I think first off, you have to be able to handle that load. I don't think anyone in the room wants to see 30,000 homes be shut down. So the question is what data centers are interruptible, what are uninterruptible, and then how we manage the load within that framework.
Is there a distinction, maybe in that one, but I'm also thinking in terms of regulatory, maybe tax implications, when we talk about behind the meter or before the meter and data centers? Can you explain that? Yeah.
Right, so there are implications, an installation going behind the meter as opposed to in front of the meter. In a perfect world, I'd love to see everyone in front of the meter because that's going to bring a downward pressure on rates for all ratepayers. Remember, a rate is a cost per unit. So as you increase the number of units, but you don't increase the cost at the same rate, you will bring rates down. So the more data centers we put in front of the meter, you will have a downward pressure on rates for all ratepayers.
Right, last one in the same line of thinking, data monetization. So that data is my data or, our data, and these data centers are going to be selling that. Do we have a role to oversee, to protect?
That is a very good question as well. And that was a question I was asked before, thinking that we should be the oversight agency of that. Really, I don't think there's any oversight agency of that, and that's something that, policymakers should probably discuss.
Yeah, if I may, Chairman, isn't what we're talking about the PJM perfect storm here? And I'll make a bold statement, maybe the answer to the data centers is no. That we're looking at 13 states that are going to undergo significant rate shock as a result of PJM's decision to accommodate data centers across their 13-foot footprint. That's not a decision that we're making here in Pennsylvania. It's a decision that's being made someplace else, but we, as ratepayers in Pennsylvania, are going to pay for this.
Well, I think it's important, we're standing here today, but we're beginning to recognize that we should at least do that on purpose, one way or the other. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Representative Kale.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for coming here today. I get extremely frustrated when we start talking about energy here, and I don't think it's anything short of political malpractice that we are having conversations about grid reliability in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. With all of the natural resources that we have here, whether it's coal, whether it's natural gas, whether it's nuclear facilities. I have one in my district. It was the very first commercial nuclear facility. President Eisenhower was there to commission it. We are the energy state. We produce energy here, and yet at the same time, we are having conversations about potentially lights not turning on. It's political malpractice. And you mentioned something earlier, Mr. Chairman, that I just want to touch on a little bit. You said that this is a conversation that we need to have regarding energy policy, that the legislator and the governor needs to talk about energy policy moving forward. Well, guess what? The legislator had absolutely nothing to do with entering the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. And that matter right now is before the state's Supreme Court, and we're still waiting on litigation. And this governor, who claimed that he didn't like the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, but is still pursuing it through legal recourse, has not done anything to improve that situation, because you are exactly right. There needs to be a conversation across the board with legislators, with the governor, because we could talk about acronyms, we could talk about, PACER, RGGI, and all these other things, but one day we're going to wake up and the lights aren't going to turn on. And then our constituents are going to come to us and say, what have you been doing over the course of the last 10 years? And that is the one positive thing about what happened with the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, is that no one's going to be able to point at Republicans and say, this is your fault. This was this administration, it's the last administration, it's legislators that refuse to overturn the governor's will with the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. And I want to talk about something here for you as far as energy policy moving forward that has been proposed. In 2022-23, the PUC put out a report regarding the cost of the AEPS Tier 1. Do you recall what the cost to ratepayers was?
I don't have that.
I believe
about 400 million?
For Tier 1, I believe it was 277 million.
That might be total.
And the real question is how about for 23-24? Do we have the cost there?
I do not, but we can get that for you.
Okay. And in the governor's plan, Tier 1 is, I believe, suggested to go from 8% to 35%. I have a couple questions relating to this. Number one, what is Tier 1? What does that mean, just for the public to understand what Tier 1 means in the alternative energy portfolio?
So I'm going to ask Vice Chair Barrow to answer this.
So currently in the AEPS and the alternative energy portfolio standard, that is, think of the more well-known renewables, wind, solar, that kind of thing.
So that's what's included in Tier 1. I just want to be clear that the governor's proposal of taking Tier 1 from 8% to 35% is importing energy from places like China and Vietnam and India, it's not using our own natural resources. We have this abundance of natural gas here in the Commonwealth. We have coal resources. We have means of doing it and doing it safely and doing it cleanly and lowering our carbon emissions. But instead, the administration's plan is to use more renewables that's just importing goods from China and India. Is that correct?
So, Representative, I haven't seen actual legislative language on the plan, but I do believe the intent is to expand to things like small run hydro, of which the state does have that resource. Things like geothermal. Also, I do believe there's still waste coal in there, so it is not all.
What would the increase in cost be if we went from 8% to 35% in Tier 1? What would the increase to ratepayers be?
I have no idea. I don't know.
Would you consider it significant, though? I mean, that's a pretty significant interjection into the market.
It depends on which resources exactly they're planning on using and what's available.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Representative Mays.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Chair, and to your leadership team. A question I have is about the rate-making process and who's involved and what roles they're playing. So my first question to you is, could you discuss the rate-making process and the role of consumers? And particularly, can you discuss the challenges of human rights as it relates to the ability or the lack thereof of some of our vulnerable Commonwealth residents to pay for their utilities? I'm thinking about seniors, I'm thinking about pregnant women, I'm thinking about people with disabilities as a function of increasing end user costs.
Thank you for the question. And that's a challenge we face every day. We're coming off of 31 rate cases last year. Affordability, at least for me, comes first to mind because, you know, many folks were having affordability challenges before those were filed, and they're only going to exacerbate it. So thank you for the question. That's not lost upon me of the challenges folks face. And in fact, real quick, while we're talking about those 31 rate cases, 51 counties, ratepayers were in 51 counties were 2 or more increases last year. So, you know, it's not lost upon me the electric ratepayer is also the water ratepayer, is also the natural gas ratepayer, and getting hit multiple fronts here. The way the rate-making process works is a utility comes in, they are allowed to come in at their own discretion to file for rates. They will file a tariff with us, and then we start a rate case review of it. So basically, the first step is figuring out a revenue requirement, how much is needed to operate the utility. Second step is how we divvy it up. So first step, how big's the pie? Second step is how we're cutting up the pie.
And then just a follow-up question, can you highlight the role of the Office of the Consumer Advocate, the Office of the Small Business Advocate, as well as the Consumer Advisory Council? I just want to note I've attended many meetings of the PUC in the city of Pittsburgh, where I represent the 24th Legislative District, on behalf of ratepayers to ensure that they can live and sustain with rising costs. So if you could explain how all those different entities or stakeholders in the rate-making process, what roles do they all play?
So the two advocates are our two statutory advocates. That's the consumer advocate and the small business advocate. They typically enter into rate cases, so they will intervene, representing consumer advocate, representing consumers, small business advocate, representing our small businesses. So they typically intervene, and they will be the voice for those groups within the rate case. And I apologize, you asked the role of customers. The role of customers is very important in a rate case because, you know, it allows us to know what's going on. The case of PA American's rate case, for instance, we had customers come in through the public input hearing process and testify. They test about quality of service. As a result of that testimony, we initiated a quality of service investigation. we don't know there's a problem unless someone tells us there's a problem. So it's very important to have public participation. I cannot stress that enough. And if you look at any of our statements in any of these rate cases, I think it's clear that we read those comments. We know what the public was saying. So I don't want folks to think that they're going to, wait in line to speak, and then, it's going to go unheard. We are hearing what folks are saying because this comes, again, first of mind for us. In terms of CAC, Consumer Advocate, CAC, they are not a statutory advocate. They are a body within the commission that helps advise us. It's the Consumer Advisory Council. I couldn't remember what the acronym was for. We have so many acronyms, I can't remember all of them. So, but they're very important. I go to CAC meetings as much as I can because those folks give their time freely. They're all volunteers. They're in town all day long. These are long meetings. And it's not exactly the most interesting topics, right? It's utility regulation. But they are an invaluable resource to us. I know that I go to those meetings regularly. I appreciate their involvement. And they are a very valuable resource because they have a good story to tell. And I usually take a lot of that, what they share with us.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair, once again. Thank you for being here. And I could not forget to say happy Women's History Month. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Marcel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of you for being here this afternoon. I have two areas that I wanted to quickly try to cover. The first is that I'm going to pivot to the NARUC Gas Task Force. I understand that one of the areas of this task force is looking into essentially how we can look at renewable natural gas, or RNG. I think that's an interesting thing for Pennsylvania. Recognizing that last session we passed in our legislation, the grant program is the Ag Innovation Grant Program. So now we're looking at allowing for grants that can help to develop methane digesters. So I'm just wondering what can be done to encourage our natural gas utilities to allow them to incorporate RNG into their portfolios? Are there other things that possibly are holding them back from doing so? So if you could just share some thoughts on that first.
So I would like to ask Commissioner Zerfa, she is the vice chair of that task force, to answer.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. No? Okay. I didn't want to strain my neck, but thank you very much for the question. And honestly, Representative, it's like you're reading from my diary. I love talking about renewable natural gas, biogas, the ag innovation grants. There's a beautiful synergy between our agricultural industry and our energy industry for sure. As a co-vice chair of that NARUC Gas Task Force, also in conjunction with the Department of Energy, we are in the midst of a 2-year planning process. Commissioners across the entire nation are getting together to talk about how we plan ahead for our natural gas infrastructure. And as part of those conversations, RNG absolutely comes up. And I don't want to spoil we're still in the middle of putting together this toolkit, right, for legislatures and commissions across the country that'll come out probably in the summer. But I will tell you that we just came from a policy summit, a NARUC policy summit in DC just last week. As part of that summit, RNG comes up a lot. I think folks are starting to realize that RNG should be part of a conversation, part of the solution to the energy challenges that we face, right? And it's an and solution, right? And RNG. So, I mean, in my humble opinion, I think we should be getting our hands on every molecule and every electron that we can to manage the challenges that we have ahead of us. As for what we can be doing more for RNG, I think finally, like I said, folks are starting to realize it's part of the solution. Those ag innovation grants, kudos to everyone in the legislature, the Department of Agriculture, the administration for that one-of-a-kind ag program. Those grants are funding lots of energy programs, particularly waste-to-energy projects. Those projects are super integral to the conversations we're having about resource adequacy, reliability and that sort of thing. What we can be doing more, I mean, money's nice. Those grants were really great, right? It's funding innovation. We're truly funding these innovative projects, but it's more than that. I think we need some tweaks here and there and various laws to encourage or incent more of this technology, whether we are, changing something relating to tipping fees or waste food diversion laws. I've got folks in the agricultural community who say they can probably power a 1 megawatt data center with a digester. But there are barriers in the way, but there's small policy issues I think we can kind of get off, clear the deck of, and it'll really incent it more. But of course, those grants are amazing.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your thoughts on that. And I wanted to switch really quickly to my colleague, Representative Kale, talked about keeping the lights on and grid reliability, which is really important. There was an article in the Bucks County Herald, and my district is in Bucks County, where the president of PPL is actually last week, talked about just some concerns regarding the resource adequacy crisis in Pennsylvania. And I wanted to just read one part of it and see if you have any thoughts. Unfortunately, further supply market price increases are expected. Despite these higher prices, not enough new generation is being built in the short time frame it is needed to offset these higher prices. That means our customers are paying and will continue to pay significantly more for generation on their electric bills. This is a fundamental flaw in how the PJM capacity market works. The question now is, how can we avoid a resource adequacy crisis in Pennsylvania? So that's my question to you.
So I think that there's not going to be one answer. I think there's going to be several answers. This is challenging. As I said, it's a 30 to 40 gigawatt shortfall that PJM's predicting. So first off, and I see we're at time, I'll try to be quick here. First off, are their reports accurate? Are we really going to have a 30 to 40 gigawatt shortfall in 20 or 30 years? I think the transmission will be part of the solution. I think generation will be part of the solution. I think issues like energy efficiency, Act 129 programs, I think it's going to be all of those things. Load shifting, what I talked about earlier, all those things will be needed to meet the demand needs.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentlelady. Representative Friel.
Thank you, sir. We'll get right to it. I have two questions I would like to try to fit in here in the 5-minute mark. And the first is something to explore a little bit deeper on the rate considerations when we're talking about energy rates, specifically with requirements of grid enhancement technologies or the use of grid enhancement technologies when you're making your case, when they're making the case for the rate increases. Kind of what's your thoughts on that? What is the PUC requiring, and do you see anything emerging there that's going to be particularly helpful?
Sure. So I think that we've seen a concerning trend, and that is on reliability. We're seeing that across many EDCs. A lot of that deals with vegetation management, keeping right-of-ways clean, but we are seeing reliability starting to decline across the board. Grid technologies that you talked about is important because it isolates, it limits those disturbances, those outages. Say you have a line come down, to give you an example, so what the grid will do, a smart grid will do, is it isolates that downed area, and then we'll convert or we'll revert power around it. So less customers are impacted by it. Customers in the area would still be impacted by it, but customers surrounding would likely not be impacted by it. So that's important because it keeps lights on for folks. The worst thing we want to do is have folks paying electric bills and lights going off repeatedly. So reliability is a big concern for us. We are seeing some downward trends, and in fact, we had one of our EDCs for the first time tie in a rate case, tie it to reliability, and pledge to increase their reliability numbers before the next rate case. So that's the first time we've had an EDC do that, and we will see where they are at when they come in for the next case.
I appreciate that, and I highly encourage us, I think, as a body, and if we need any legislative fixes to sort of mandate the investment in that reliability or using those dynamic grid technologies to improve it as a condition upon which we could do rate cases, be interested in that.
So that would be certainly helpful, is having a legislative mandate, because, we can require it, but if it gets into costs, you may get some pushback here. If it's a legislative mandate, then
yeah, so if we could put that as a consideration in rate cases, I think that would be something to pursue. Sure. Switching, I want to go back to American Water, well, not American Water, but just the general move from privatization to, under Act 12 of our sewer and water utilities. And we're seeing, what I would say there's been perverse incentives in the amount that these utilities are being sold for by municipalities, and the estimates of deferred maintenance that then ultimately gets passed on to the consumer. And I'm wondering if you would support legislation to modify the way we evaluate the cost of those, both the evaluation of what the transition cost should be going from municipal to private, and also what's allowable in terms of the capital costs that we invest in there that the ratepayers can then absorb into the market.
So, happy to always work with the legislature on trying to, make that act, or making 1329 acquisitions better for customers. What we did was, in the General Assembly, what we did in the commission last year was we passed an order that sort of put guardrails around 1329 acquisitions. It did 4 things. It did customer notification requirements, letting customers being acquired know what their rate may be if the sale goes through. It required additional public meetings, another public meeting to be held. One of the things we heard a lot of was, customers felt the train was already down the tracks before they even knew about it. So we wanted to address that issue. The third is valuation, and that, the law, there's 3 valuation methods. When our review of some of the 1329 applications and approvals, the valuation, sometimes valuation numbers were cherry picked. So if you had a valuation number low, the appraiser threw it out. What we did was require all 3 appraisal methods in the law to be weighted equally. So each appraisal method's a third, a third, a third. And then the final thing we did, and I think it's the biggest meat of the order, and that is it established what we call the reasonableness review ratio. And what that does is it takes the overall water, publicly traded water system. So every water company in the country, we only have about 8 to 10 publicly traded water companies. It takes those publicly traded companies, looks at what their value is compared to their depreciated value. Remember, we are economic regulators. We're not environmental regulators, we're economic regulators. And so I thought it's important, I always say, you can only pay $1 million for a $500,000 house so many times before it catches up to you. What we wanted to do is we wanted an idea of what these transactions, how they look in regard to the entire industry. So the value compared to depreciated value, what that ratio is, that's what we publish. And then we, as we judge these applications, we can look at that and use that as a guide.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. Representative Alsaber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman DeFrank, for being here today, and team. I appreciate it very much. Chairman DeFrank, can you speak to the letter that you received from Senator Yaw on June 20th, 2024, which addresses Governor Shapiro's proposal to rewrite and expand AEPS mandate, specifically with his proposed press plan to increase the current mandate on electric utilities?
I don't recall receiving that letter. So happy to get back to you, though.
Okay, yeah, that would be great. If you could you, if you did reply to the Senate with their concerns, could you supply the committee with a copy of that as well?
Sure.
Okay, thank you very much. There are significant reasons to be concerned about the impact that the press proposal would have if enacted. There are a few concerns that I have. The impact grid reliability risking lost investment in reliable thermal generation, threatening Pennsylvania's status as a net exporter of electricity, and negative impacts on AEPS, Tier 2 generation resources. Can you speak about these different concerns?
Sure. I would ask Vice Chair Barrow to answer the question, please.
Representative, thank you for your concerns. Right now, where we are as an electric grid, I think we need every single megawatt that we can get online. And I understand the concern about having 24/7 baseload power. But something that we learned during, for example, Winter Storm Elliott, if you have a system that is powered by mostly gas, when something happens to that fleet, you're going to have a lot of outages amongst one class of power generation. We need a diversity of power sources. So wind performed well, other resources performed well, and what we need is that mix. And I think the science and the art is going to be in finding the right mix, but we can't put all of our eggs in one basket. Yes, we need more gas. Yes, we need nuclear to stay online and possibly new nuclear. And I believe that that's what press is trying to get at. Just my opinion.
And I wonder if you could for the folks back home watching, could you talk to us a little bit about and give us some examples of Tier 2 generation resources specifically?
Currently in AEPS, we've got it's not just what you think of traditionally as renewable resources. I mean, we've got things like wood pulp, black liquor, so waste coal, things like that. So things that are found here in the state. And I believe the press legislation is looking to expand hydropower, it's looking to incent geothermal, battery storage, looking to increase and simplify the way that we look at solar. Just a couple of examples. I don't have the whole list.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, gentlemen. Representative Curry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary, and the team for being here today. I wanted to ask a question around Chapter 14. Thinking about the PUC, I wanted to really ask a question about the priority of the PUC on the equity issues of those who are most vulnerable. And I know some of the other reps asked a question about it, but I want to specifically look at the lack of access and the continuum of other issues that happen as a result of an energy cutoff or any type of utility like food insecurities and housing. And looking at the statistics, it looked like there were about 330 to 375,000 families that were shut off last year in some capacity. And looking at another statistic, it said it was about 14,000 families that went into this winter without heat. So with that being said, my biggest concern is looking at the vulnerable and how the PUC prioritizes.
Sure. So I'm going to turn this over to Commissioner Zerfas, who's handling Chapter 14 issues for us. I will let you know that when the legislature adjourned in sine die last year, we did pass an order in December, basically keeping the table set as is. While the General Assembly reconsiders the reauthorization, you know, the bill has moved in one chamber already. I realize this is going to be a priority, so we did keep the table set as is while you continue to debate it.
And when you say the tables, you mean the protections? The
protections,
okay.
yes, yes.
All right, thank you.
So I would add, I would reiterate that nothing has changed, right? So administratively, that table is set. And to your, excuse me, your question, your comment about equity or being cognizant of those who are in most need, of course we are, right? We have in mind to keep the balance of all ratepayers, and of course we're cognizant of those who are struggling the most. I will just say that as it relates to Chapter 14, that the best way to keep people safe in their homes and to have them continue to pay on their bills is to be able to have affordable payment arrangements and arrearage management, right? I think that's the crux of what we're hearing through this Chapter 14.
Exactly, and I know a lot of our offices get people in the LIHEAP and all the different programs. That's a big part of our services to our constituents throughout the winter months and even in the summers. But the other question, in a lack of time that we have, I know that there is a procedure put in place in pediatrics where if your utility bills or your utilities get cut off, that you can go into the office and ask for a medical assistance to get the utilities cut back on. I want to know how the PUC is working around that, because there have been some times where there's lack of access to get to the pediatrician when your energy gets shut off, right? And then availability to get into that office. And we know that the pediatricians don't have to agree. And so folks that are there that have lack of access or availability to their pediatrician at that time, we know that when your lights get cut off or your heat or whatever it is, when you have small children in the house, you need it now. So right now it looks like it's up to the pediatrician if there's a medical assistant need. Is there any other way or certification that can be given to folks, pregnant women, folks with young children, outside of the pediatrician?
I mean, you're talking about the medical certificate, correct?
That's one way, right? Yeah, one way is the medical.
The medical certificate is the piece of this conversation that would fall within our purview, right? So I understand that right now the medical certificate, it's about a 30-day turnaround time, and I would add that, you know, regardless of the bills that have passed the chambers, the PUC, as part of our legislative priorities or conversation pieces on Chapter 14, you know, agree that there needs to be a tweak to the medical certificate part, you know, particularly as it relates to the time period, right? 30 days seems like it might just be more administratively burdensome for all parties involved, you know, so to extend that timeline. And I believe we've seen some of that in some of the bills that have passed through the chamber.
Is that something that the PUC can do, or does that need to be legislatively put in place?
So that has to be legislatively, and so the bill that's in the Senate version that's in the House right now, I believe changes it. So I think we have 3 30-day med certs to do one 190-day. So the time's the same, but it expands. So as you said, you couldn't get in the doctor's office or whatever. It makes the med cert
So in that time period,
longer.
families are without energy for a 190-day medical cert. Is that what I'm hearing?
It means they cannot be terminated during that period that the med certs.
But they have to have the certificate to be able to turn into the, okay, so you hear my point, right?
Yes.
There's some inconsistencies.
And that's also a difference between the House version and the Senate version, is the House version last year went beyond doctors. It allowed nurse practitioners to issue them. It allowed, I think, a social worker to issue them. It allowed other professionals to, and I think that's what your question was. The version that was in the House was more expansive in terms of who can authorize it.
Right, absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
I'll thank the gentlelady, Representative DeVanzo.
Thank you, Chairman Harrison. Thank you, Chairman DeFrank here. I want to talk about utility poles a little bit and broadband here. So when there's an accident, we have a vehicle accident that goes out and strikes a utility pole. Talk about the process. When should the utility company come out? Reasonable times, because we're having a problem out west here where 4 or 5 hours before utility company comes out, even to you know, terminate whatever it is, telecommunications, and it really it's a holdup on everybody, you know.
So there's 2 standards for poles. It depends if it's an energy pole. So we're talking about electric company, or if it's a telecommunications issue. So basically, if there's any threat to the facilities, to the line, and it's an energy pole, they should be out there proactively to address it. Telecommunications, it's a little tougher. So their standard is, an energy company standard is if there's a threat to service, telecom company standard is if there's a disruption of service. So, a tree comes down, it's laying on lines. If they're telecommunication lines, they might come and take the tree, they might not. They might wait for the lines to break and then they'll come out. With energy, because of the safety component, they should be out there immediately. So if you're having issues where you're waiting 4 or 5 hours, please let us know.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned telecommunications. When the poles hit and the lines are sagging, is there, if a line's 2 or 3 feet off the ground, is that a safety issue at all if a kid would go over and hang on it? It's not energized, this would be telecommunications.
Right, so my view is there is, but we have very little, since we've deregulated telecom space, we have very little regulation over them. So
yeah, and the reason I ask is we have a utility pole that's been hanging between Thanksgiving and Christmas. There was an accident, and it's right off the road, and the lines are that high, and nobody cares. And if what do we have to do? Some type of legislative fix to step in here? Because
we'll reach out to you and get the location of that and figure out whose pole it is and contact.
All right, perfect. Thank you for that. And I just want to touch on real quick the $1.6 billion in federal funding for Pennsylvania, for the Commonwealth, for the broadband. I sit on the Westmoreland County Broadband Authority. Can you touch on what kind of obstacles are out there, maybe that would slow this money from getting deployed to where we need it, and areas that we could be doing more?
So I am on the Broadband Development Authority. I'm a board member there. Our first round, we drove a lot of money out. It depended on the project, but we leveraged a dollar-for-dollar investment and private investment with that money. So I know that, I heard from my old former commissioners down in Fayette County, and I assume Westmoreland County is very similar, that yes. The first round, there was not a lot of money put into southwestern Pennsylvania. I believe the second round, there was some more put there. The bottom line is the $2.2 billion is not even going to address the needs. We're not going to get everyone served with that money. It's a question of whether we get all the money now with changes in administration in DC. I hope we do. But even if we do, I'm not sure we're still going to have everyone served there. So it's still an issue we have to deal with as we, these unserved areas now, they're usually the most expensive and the toughest to serve. And so, it means that, doesn't mean we stop. It just means it's tougher to do. Maybe it's going to be a wireless incentive or a wireless solution as opposed to a pole and wire solution to get to some of these hard to reach areas. Yeah, but we got to do something.
It's just frustrating coming from rural PA. When the broadband came through, everyone cherry picked. Hey, we're going to come back and get the last 2 to 3 miles. Right. Somewhere they got money along the way, still never got it. So this is something that I'm passionate about and just going to keep pushing through.
You're exactly right. Cherry picked is the prime word there, and that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank the gentleman, Representative Mattson.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman, and your team for being here. I stand before you as a proud kid that came from Middletown, Pennsylvania. So my question will be centered around 3 Mile Island. And when I was a child, I actually thought chocolate was made in Hershey and that clouds were made from the steam coming from 3 Mile Island. So I'm glad to hear that the cloud factory may be coming back online. But yeah, it's been reported that Unit 1 of 3 Mile Island will be reopened in 2028 after closing in 2019. The reopening is driven by an increased demand for power, primarily due to the growing energy needs of data centers. Could you discuss how such needs may affect the necessity for not only additional power resources, but also the need for diversity in such resources? And I'd like to add, there's many rumors and talks in my district, and it seems like some other legislators' districts around these data centers, so real curious to get your answer.
Ask Vice Chair Barrow to answer.
Thanks for the question. we spend so much time talking about data centers right now. And I mentioned earlier that currently it's looking, if the forecasts are right, that we need 30 to 40 gigawatts of power to power these data centers. Think about a data center load. It's about 1,000 megawatts, so 1 gig for one data center. That is the amount of power you would take to power small city, a mid-sized city. So it's a lot of power that we need. Thankfully, with the Crane Energy Center, which used to be known as TMI in Middletown, thankfully that is going to reopen. And this is one of those cases where the data center brought its own power, because that data center contracted with the owner's Constellation, and they're bringing it back to life. So we do need to see more projects like that bring your own power. But even if all of that, and I wouldn't even call it low-hanging fruit, but I call it low-hanging fruit because the plant's already there, the transmission lines are already there. It's the quickest way to do it. Once we get through all of that, we still need to look at, all right, we actually have to put some steel in the ground and build some generation to meet this load. And we need to do it in a thoughtful and planned way. There's no use in bringing these data centers online if they are going to threaten our reliability. We want them to come online. It's good for the economy. It's good for PA. It's good for the US. But we need to do it in a really thoughtful way.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'd just like to add, I proudly joined the Nuclear Caucus, so if more talks around nuclear do come up, happy to talk about it. Went on tours of TMI when I was a kid, and I proudly can say I do not glow in the dark or anything like that, so while I appreciate people's concerns over 3 Mile Island reopening, I do think there's some good conversation, and they can be safe if I think regulated correctly. So thank you for that. That's my only question. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Representative Mostello.
Thank you, Chairman Harris. Commissioner, you've been like Chairman Harris's mom in watching these hearings. Last week, you know that we had the DEP before us, and we were talking about funding issues related to the management of forever chemicals, PFAS, commonly referred to, which are impacting our water resources. And there's been a lot of concern with the impact of this, but also a lot of confusion between the lack of clarity between what the feds are putting out and what the DEP is and the state authorities, what they're putting out related to the PFAS limits related to our drinking water. So can you speak about this issue and how EPA's recent PFAS rule for drinking water could be a significant driver of rate increases for water systems in the Commonwealth?
Sure, I'd ask Commissioner Coleman to answer this. Commissioner Coleman?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the question. I guess the best place to start is that we are the economic regulator and DEP is the environmental regulator. So DEP has the jurisdiction on what the acceptable levels of PFAS are in water supply. The consequence on the commission side is all of those water companies that now need to treat for PFAS and PFOA. This is a significant cost. In fact, for one of the large investor-owned utilities, they're estimating a $250 million spend. So for the larger, what we call Class A, the larger investor-owned water utilities, it's going to be expensive, but they are going to be able to make those investments. My concern is going to be for the medium to smaller water companies that have to comply with that same regulation and the cost that they're going to have to incur in order to treat for those forever chemicals.
Right. Are you hearing from some of the utilities?
Are we here? I'm sorry, are we here?
Have you been hearing from some of them?
Yes,
their
we are.
Concerns, expressing their concerns?
And
what have you done to do anything maybe on a proactive level to discuss these costs with them and how it's going to affect them?
Well, the cost is recoverable in rates. But again, that if you're looking at a significant cost over a small customer base, it is going to be significant for those customers within that system. So it's a significant issue.
It is. So what's the PUC doing to maybe balance that out, maybe discuss this with them so the ratepayers aren't hit all at once?
So if I may add, one of the things that, we've been amazed with DEP. My personal view is because the costs are so great, the ratepayers are not going to be able to foot the bill by themselves here. The taxpayer or someone needs to step in because the ratepayer is not going to be able to do it. Our investor-owned utilities have been going to Penvest, and they have been successful in securing funding from there, low-interest loans, turning them around and repaying them. So that helps, and it's a lower rate than we would be if we were, funding this, through, Wall Street investment, through a hedge fund or something like that. It is a lower rate, but at some point something has to give here because our utilities are not going to be able. Rates are going to be unsustainable. I mean, if it's only the ratepayer paying that.
Right. Did you have a comment to it?
Yes, and we've also encouraged, and thankfully they've taken us up on it, the water utilities are pursuing litigation against the chemical companies, and the money is starting to flow. So they will be recompensed for some of that cost. By no means all of it, but we're talking hundreds of
Right. Do you
millions.
sense anything maybe different with the EPA and our new administration now?
So I was wondering that if we were going to see a different standard. And what I'm told by the water folks is likely not, because it's so far down the road that I do not believe EPA will be revisiting that.
Okay, great.
And did you want to add something?
No, I was just going to reiterate about the Penvest loans and how important they are to keep costs low for consumers, right, through like rate cases, right, for the recovery of those costs. Not only are they getting Penvest loans, they're getting grants, right? We know that grants is like, it's just the money, right? There's no repayment there. So they are I want to give kudos to the utilities for being proactive in that space.
Well, that's good. All right, thank you so much for your questions. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentlelady, Representative Kozarowski.
Okay. Good afternoon, and thank you, Commissioner, for being here today with us. My question has to do with broadband and the support of broadband, and really in that realm of healthcare. In recent years, certainly since COVID and then the destigmatizing mental health, there's so much more access to telehealth, and certainly in rural areas and those that are, underserved or not served. So, as a nurse and somebody that really does support access to healthcare and certainly telehealth, I just wanted to know, what are you doing to, support the access that people can be able to reach out to their physicians and specialists?
So, as I said, I do have a seat on the Broadband Development Authority. So, in addition to that, what we've done at the commission was we instituted a poll attachment proceeding. Prior to us making our change, contested poll attachments could take up to 270 days. It's 9 months. It's the same as a rate case. We lowered that following an FCC order to 60 days. So, it's an effort to get these disputes resolved quicker and to get more lines on poles quicker. So that build out can happen then.
Well, thank you. Because as you know, in rural health, it's no secret in the Commonwealth, all these hospitals are closing. Yep. It's a huge crisis here. So telehealth is more and more and more important to our patients here. So thank you.
Connectivity isn't a nice to have anymore. It's a must have.
Agreed.
We were in a completely different space than we were 10 years ago even. We shop we shop remotely, we go to work remotely, we go to school remotely, we go to the doctors remotely. Yeah. So that's not an option anymore, that's a must have. And we are trying to make sure folks have connectivity. As I said to the previous speaker, unfortunately, these are usually the hardest to connect. Yeah. I mean, we're at the end of the line here. There's a reason that they're at the end of the line there. So everyone cherry-picked all the easy spots there. Yeah. Now we're into the tough locations.
Yeah. I know it's a challenge, so I appreciate what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank the gentlelady, Chairman Struzzi.
Thank you, Chairman. So
wow, there's a whole lot here that we could touch on moving forward. And I think a lot of concerns. But before I get to that, you had mentioned transmission line projects, that you receive hundreds of applications, just so I understand that. Is that what was said?
Yeah, we have a streamlined application process. We call them letters of notification. When and usually what it is another term of endearment is wreck and rebuild. So if it's going to be in the same right-of-way, less than 2 miles in length, it is, they file an application with the PUC, the electric company does, and we review it. We give notices given to the locality, and if there are no protests, it's something that's done wholly on paper.
Okay, so you
that's how
review
we go
every
through.
application that comes in, though?
Yeah.
Could you get us an exact number of that, if you could? Thanks. So I want to talk a little bit about, I think the biggest concern that we've heard outlined here today is the potential lack of energy production to meet that demand of 30 to 40 gigawatts of electric generation here in the next 5 years, possibly. And in some cases, possibly sooner. But I think people need to understand, like, a gigawatt is a lot of power, right? It's 1,000 megawatts, enough to power 750,000 homes with 1 gigawatt, and we're looking at a potential shortfall of that many gigawatts. But I think it's also important to note that I think, a lot of this, and I know that you said earlier, Mr. Chairman, that, it didn't matter where it was built, this production, but it matters to us because we would like to see it built here in PA. I understand from a grid perspective, it doesn't matter, but for us who represent this Commonwealth, we want to see that energy production happen here. And so when we talk about things like RGGI and PRESS and PACER, I think it is concerning because we have not seen that energy production here. We know particularly in Western PA, where a lot of us feel it for real. We know that a lot of our neighbors who work in the building trades have gone to other states or in energy production. I know my Homer City generating station that shut down a year and a half ago, that was a 2 gigawatt facility. So that's energy that's not available, baseload energy that's not available in the grid. And I know we talk a lot about, all of the above type of scenario, but right now, if you look at the PJM, it's primarily nuclear and natural gas. So my question is, just from a pure, take the policy out of the equation, right? From a pure generation standpoint, if you had the opportunity to make changes that would account for this increase in demand potentially, what would you do?
So first to clarify though, Chairman, I do think it's important to build in Pennsylvania as well. I was just speaking from grid management.
Right.
That it's anywhere in the grid. But obviously, we like being an exporter here, and I hope we continue to be an exporter. So it is important to build here. I just wanted to clarify that. In terms of your question, the struggles we have, we are going to be faced with this shortfall. And again, I don't think we're going to build our way out of it. We're not going to build our way out of it through transmission. We're not going to build our way out of it through generation. I don't think we can have it up and running quick enough. Put it in perspective, an average gas plant is 800 megawatts. So we're talking, are we going to build 50 gas plants in the next 5 years? I mean, that's really, to put numbers on it, that's what we're talking about.
But we could.
Hopefully, I think that what we're hearing now is supply chain issues. I mean, it typically was about 3 years for a combustion turbine. We're seeing those run about 4 to 5 now. And as we have folks trying to build 50 plants at one time, I guarantee you that's going to go out even further.
Right.
It's about 3 to 4 years to get a turbine. So, and that's why, our capacity auction is a 3-year look ahead, because that's how long it took to build that type of a unit. So, I think that we're going to need an above all approach. I think that, as we've heard everyone say, put as many watts on the grid as we possibly can. I think we are going to have to build out transmission infrastructure, electric transmission infrastructure, in order to meet those needs. But then we're also going to have to look at the way we use power. Again, load shifting. I don't know that we're going to be able to power all these data centers evenly across the board. How can we shift and power one data center down while we're powering another one up?
Yeah.
I think that we just have to look at how we manage the grid differently than we have for the last 20 years when we had a huge reserve margin and no growth.
Well, I don't think we want to say no to industry that wants to come to Pennsylvania.
No, not at all.
I think we need to find a way to solve this sooner rather than later.
One of the things is, FERC opened a co-location rulemaking matter. When I did meet with PJM's board last week, that's one of the things that I conveyed was that if a data center is going in an importing state, that data center should have generation attached to it. Because all we're doing is we're competing against states and then we're sending our power to them. That doesn't make sense to me.
It doesn't.
We want to keep them here.
Right. I agree with you. So I think everything we can do to keep production high in Pennsylvania, continue to be an exporter, and in my perspective, just what I've seen over the past 5 or 6 years, I think that the energy policy and environmental policy need to, favor industry and business while also adhering to, the concerns that are out there. But we're already doing that. And so my focus then would be, I think all of our focus should be on the dangerous threat of not having enough electricity to power the grid and to power our homes in the next 4 to 5 years. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen. Chairman DeFrank, one question for you. The NTSB investigation into the RM Palmer explosion raised serious concerns about the aging underground first-generation plastic pipeline, which are prone to leak and have failures. The PUC has proposed requiring utilities to accelerate the replacement of these pipelines, but reports indicate that many high-risk areas remain untouched. What specific actions are you guys taking right now since the explosion to ensure that the aging pipeline, especially in industrial zones, are being taken care of?
So I can't talk about that specific case because we still have our investigation ongoing, but I can speak generally about it. What we did last year, we instituted a tentative order where we were looking at first generation plastics. We have a roadmap. I think we have a very good story to tell in Pennsylvania of how we've addressed cast iron. Since 2011, we've removed, with the exception of municipal systems, 89% of cast iron in Pennsylvania. And that's because of our DISC mechanism. So we already have the tools in place. I think it's focusing those tools, making sure we're looking at first generation plastics, like we're looking at cast iron, like we're looking at bare steel. And making sure that we add that material to the risk analysis and to the risk assessment to make sure we're removing potentially dangerous materials in a timely fashion.
Thank you so much for that answer, and thank you all for being here. With that will conclude our budget hearing this afternoon with the Pennsylvania Utilities Commission. We will be back here on the floor tomorrow at 10 a.m., where we will spend the entire day with the Department of Human Services. Our state's largest department will be here with us for the entire day, starting at 10 a.m. tomorrow. And with that, this day of budget hearings are adjourned.